The path to rock stardom has never been a straight line, but some musicians took detours that were downright shocking. From staged deaths to stolen identities, these artists pushed every boundary imaginable, turning controversy into currency and outrage into album sales. Some of their stunts became legendary, while others nearly destroyed everything they built. Here are 12 unbelievable stories about rock stars who did anything to be famous. Gene Simmons turned himself into a walking billboard. Gene Simmons didn't just want to be a rock star, he wanted to be a brand. The Kiss bassist understood something most musicians didn't in the 1970s. Fame wasn't just about music, it was about creating a character people couldn't forget. So he became the Demon, complete with 7-inch tongue, blood-spitting, and fire-breathing. But what really set Simmons apart was his shameless approach to merchandising. While other bands worried about selling out, Simmons was selling everything from Kiss coffins to Kiss condoms to Kiss camping equipment. He even tried to trademark the devil horns hand gesture in 2017, claiming it as his intellectual property before backing down after massive backlash. His philosophy was simple. If you can put a logo on it, sell it. This approach made him a $400 million rock star, proving that sometimes the fastest path to fame is treating yourself like a product from day one. Simmons never touched drugs or alcohol his entire career, staying sober while his bandmates spiraled, because he viewed life as too precious to waste. He learned the fire-breathing trick from a magician in the early 1970s, mastering the dangerous art of spraying kerosene from his mouth. The man who was born Chaim Witz in Israel became one of rock's most recognizable figures by understanding that in the entertainment business, spectacle sells just as well as substance. Nikki Sixx died and came back for an encore. Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue didn't just flirt with death, he actually crossed over and returned. On December 23, 1987, after a night of partying with members of Guns N' Roses and Rat, Sixx was injected with a dose of heroin that stopped his heart. Paramedics declared him dead at the scene, but one EMT refused to give up, reportedly saying he wouldn't let anyone die in his ambulance. They injected adrenaline directly into Sixx's chest, and somehow, miraculously, he came back. When Sixx woke up in the hospital with 2 syringes still sticking out of his chest, he ripped out the tubes, told a questioning police officer to leave him alone, and walked out into the parking lot wearing only leather pants. 2 crying teenage fans found him there and gave him a ride home, where he promptly shot up more heroin. The incident made international headlines, with media outlets initially reporting that Sixx had died, making him temporarily the most talked-about bassist in rock. The experience became the inspiration for Motley Crue's hit song "Kickstart My Heart," turning his near death into a platinum record. This wasn't even Sixx's first brush with death from overdosing. According to multiple biographies, during an earlier incident in London, a drug dealer thought Sixx had died and literally threw his body into a dumpster to get rid of the evidence. Sixx woke up surrounded by trash, climbed out, and continued using. The bassist would later estimate he overdosed about half a dozen times throughout his career, each time somehow surviving what should have killed him. Milli Vanilli faked everything and won a Grammy. Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan had the looks, the dance moves, and the charisma to be pop superstars in the late 1980s. The only thing they didn't have were the voices on their multi-platinum album. German producer Frank Farian had used the same trick before with his 1970s disco group, Boney M., hiring attractive performers to lip-sync to other singers, and he saw the same potential with Pilatus and Morvan. The duo was living in poverty in Munich, literally stealing food to survive, when Farian offered them $4,000 each to become the faces of Milli Vanilli. They toured around the world, appeared on every major television program, and won the Grammy for Best New Artist in 1990, beating out the Indigo Girls and Tone Loc. Their downfall came during a live MTV performance in July 1989, when the backing track started skipping, repeating the same line over and over while they stood frozen on stage. Pilatus panicked and ran off, but they managed to keep the charade going for another year. When Farian finally revealed the truth in November 1990, the fallout was devastating and unprecedented. Their Grammy was revoked, the first and only time in history the Recording Academy has taken back an award. Arista Records deleted their album from their catalog, making it one of the best-selling albums ever to be erased from existence. Fans filed class action lawsuits demanding refunds. The duo went from selling 7 million records in the United States alone to becoming the punchline of every joke about authenticity in music. Pilatus struggled deeply with the public humiliation and never recovered, dying from an accidental drug overdose in 1998 at age 33. The Sex Pistols swore their way to infamy. The Sex Pistols were relatively unknown outside music press circles until December 1, 1976, when they landed a last-minute spot on a British television show called Today. Queen was supposed to appear, but Freddie Mercury developed an emergency toothache and cancelled, opening the door for the punk band to step in. What happened next became the most requested television clip in UK history. Host Bill Grundy, a 50-something presenter known for his confrontational style, immediately clashed with the band. He patronized them, questioned their £40,000 record deal as hypocritical to their anti-establishment image, and compared them dismissively to classical composers like Beethoven and Mozart. The Pistols responded with sarcasm and sneers. When Grundy started flirting with Susie Sue, a teenage punk in their entourage, suggesting they meet up later, guitarist Steve Jones exploded, calling Grundy a dirty old man and unleashing a string of profanities on live television. Grundy, bizarrely, goaded him to continue, saying he had 5 more seconds to say something outrageous. Jones obliged, calling him a dirty bastard and a rotter before the credits rolled. The interview lasted barely 2.5 minutes, but changed everything overnight. The Daily Mirror's front page the next morning screamed, "The filth and the fury," and suddenly the Sex Pistols were on every newspaper in Britain. Grundy was suspended for 2 weeks for gross error of judgment. His show was cancelled 2 months later, and his television career never recovered. The band's manager, Malcolm McLaren, later admitted he knew the appearance would create a huge scandal and genuine history. Punk rock went from underground movement to national moral panic in a single television appearance, all because Queen's frontman had a toothache. Alice Cooper made people think he murdered a chicken. Alice Cooper understood something fundamental about fame in 1969. People remember villains better than heroes. During a performance at Toronto's Rock and Roll Revival Festival, a chicken somehow appeared on stage. Cooper, who grew up in Detroit and had never been on a farm, assumed chickens could fly. He grabbed the bird and threw it into the audience, expecting it to soar away. Instead, it dropped like a stone into the crowd of 20,000 people. What happened next shocked even Cooper. The audience, worked into a frenzy by the band's chaotic performance, tore the chicken apart and threw the bloody pieces back onto the stage. The next day, newspapers reported that Cooper had bitten the head off the chicken and drunk its blood, a complete fabrication that became rock and roll legend. When Frank Zappa, who ran Cooper's label, called to ask if it was true, Cooper explained what actually happened. Zappa's response was brilliant. "Don't tell anyone you didn't do it, because you can't buy this kind of publicity." Cooper took the advice and let the myth grow. Animal rights activists started protesting his concerts. The media invented increasingly wild stories about his depravity. Cooper realized the audience needed a villain, someone truly dangerous and unpredictable in the peace and love era. He leaned into the character, adding guillotines, fake hangings, and theatrical violence to his shows. The chicken incident, whether planned or accidental, taught Cooper that being the most notorious character in rock was more valuable than being the most talented. Interestingly, bassist Dennis Dunaway later claimed in his memoir that the band actually toured with 2 pet chickens named Larry and Pecker, suggesting the incident might have been more calculated than Cooper let on. G.G. Allin promised to die on stage every Halloween. G.G. Allin took punk rock to places even punk rockers refused to go. Born Jesus Christ Allin by his fanatical father, who believed his son would be a messiah, Allin grew up in a cabin without electricity or running water, with a father who dug graves in their cellar and threatened to fill them. That childhood trauma manifested in one of the most extreme careers in music history. By 1985, Alan had incorporated defecation into his live performances. According to multiple sources, he took laxatives before shows and would use his own feces as a weapon, throwing it at audiences and sometimes consuming it. He performed naked, rolled around in broken glass, set himself on fire, and physically assaulted audience members with regularity. But his most notorious claim was his repeated promise to commit suicide on stage on Halloween. Starting in 1989, Alan publicly announced he would kill himself during a live performance to make a statement about choosing your own fate and ending at your peak. The date came and went because he was in prison. This pattern repeated for years. When asked why he never followed through, Alan gave a characteristically defiant answer. With Gigi, you don't get what you expect, you get what you deserve. He appeared on talk shows like Geraldo and The Jerry Springer Show, making explicit threats about his plans and promoting his anarchistic worldview. His final performance on June 27, 1993, at the gas station in New York's East Village ended in a riot. The next morning, he was found dead from a heroin overdose at age 36. His death was far less theatrical than his stage threats, but Alan had already secured his legacy as what AllMusic called the most spectacular degenerate in rock and roll history. Marilyn Manson never denied the rib rumor. In the mid-1990s, one urban legend spread through schools faster than any actual news. Marilyn Manson had his ribs surgically removed. The rumor was absurd, medically questionable, and completely unverified, but it became one of the most widely believed celebrity myths of the millennial generation. The story spread entirely through word of mouth, passed from student to student with the classic setup of, "My cousin's friend told me this true story." What made the rumor stick was Manson's approach to handling it. Instead of flatly denying it, he deflected with dark humor and cryptic responses. When directly asked about it, he would joke or give vague non-answers that kept people guessing. This ambiguity was entirely intentional. Manson understood that mystery was more powerful than truth. His entire persona was built on being rock's ultimate shock artist, someone who pushed boundaries and made parents terrified. The rib removal rumor, regardless of its absurdity, fit perfectly with his carefully crafted image. In his autobiography, Manson addressed it with characteristic sarcasm, asking, "Who really has time to be killing puppies when you could be doing something else outrageous?" He never used the rumor as a factual admission, but never completely shut it down either. This strategic ambiguity kept the story alive for decades, making him one of the most talked about and controversial figures in 90s rock. The rumor had actually been attached to other artists before, including Prince, but it stuck to Manson because his theatrical shows and transgressive image made it seem plausible. By neither confirming nor denying, Manson turned an anonymous internet claim into permanent myth, proving that sometimes the best publicity comes from letting people's imaginations run wild. Ozzy Osbourne bit off a bat's head by accident. Ozzy Osbourne's reputation as the Prince of Darkness was already well established by January 1982, but one incident cemented his status as rock's most notorious madman. During a concert in Des Moines, Iowa, a fan threw what Ozzy thought was a rubber bat onto the stage. In the chaos of the performance and his admittedly altered state, Ozzy picked it up and bit its head off as part of his theatrical show. Except it wasn't rubber. It was a real bat, and Ozzy immediately realized his mistake when he tasted blood. He was rushed to the hospital for a series of rabies shots, turning what he thought was a stage prop into a genuine health emergency. The incident made international headlines and became the defining story of Ozzy's solo career. What's often forgotten is that Ozzy had previously bitten the head off a dove during a meeting with record executives, an intentional shock tactic that was supposed to demonstrate his commitment to outrageousness. That incident was planned. The bat was completely accidental, but the public didn't care about the distinction. Ozzy became the guy who bit heads off animals, a reputation he's carried for over 4 decades. Scientists later tested Ozzy's DNA and discovered it had been altered by decades of drug and alcohol abuse, and they couldn't believe he was still alive given the substances he'd consumed. The Bat incident, horrifying as it was, fit perfectly into the narrative of Ozzy as someone who had survived things that would have killed anyone else. Keith Richards allegedly snorted his father's ashes. Among the countless insane stories about Keith Richards, one stands above the rest in terms of pure shock value. In a 2007 interview, Richards casually mentioned that he had mixed his father's ashes with cocaine and snorted them. The comment was made almost as a throwaway line, but it exploded into international headlines. Richards later tried to walk it back, claiming he had been joking or misunderstood, but the damage was done. The story was too perfect, too outrageous, too Keith Richards to die. Whether it actually happened or not almost doesn't matter, because it captured something essential about the Rolling Stones guitarist's mythical status. Here was a man who had survived decades of legendary drug use, who had reportedly undergone complete blood transfusions to detox, who was still performing into his 70s despite a lifestyle that should have killed him multiple times over. Of course he would snort his own father's ashes. The story was believable because Richards had already pushed every other boundary imaginable. His survival itself was a form of performance art. Richards represented the ultimate rock and roll immortal, someone who proved you could live the excess and somehow keep going. The Father Ashes story, real or embellished, added one more chapter to a legend that was already larger than life. It also demonstrated how carefully cultivated myths can become as valuable as actual achievements in building a rock star's legacy. Iggy Pop invented the stage dive while covered in blood. Iggy Pop earned his title as the godfather of punk not through careful calculation, but through complete physical abandon. During performances with the Stooges in the early 1970s, Iggy would strip down to almost nothing and throw himself into increasingly dangerous situations. He's credited with inventing the stage dive, literally hurling his body into crowds and trusting them to catch him. But his defining stage act was self-mutilation. Iggy would deliberately cut himself with broken glass during performances, rolling around on stage covered in blood while the music raged around him. He'd smear peanut butter on his chest, walk on the audience's hands, and create scenes of such raw chaos that people didn't know if they were watching a concert or a breakdown. Unlike shock rockers who used fake blood and theatrical props, Iggy's danger was real. The scars were real. The violence was authentic. This commitment to destroying his own body night after night created a legend that influenced everyone from punk to grunge. Henry Rollins called him the bravest performer he'd ever seen. Iggy wasn't trying to offend people or generate headlines in the traditional sense. He was channeling something primal and destructive that audiences found both terrifying and magnetic. His performances were less about fame-seeking and more about complete artistic commitment. But the result was the same. He became one of rock's most iconic figures by being willing to bleed for it. Tommy Lee married Pamela Anderson on a beach after 4 days. Tommy Lee's approach to fame was simple: go bigger, faster, and more excessive than anyone else. The Motley Crue drummer didn't just play drums. He played them while rotating upside down on a roller coaster track suspended above the audience. He didn't just date celebrities. He married Playboy playmate Pamela Anderson after knowing her for 4 days, in a ceremony on a beach in Cancun where he wore board shorts and she wore a white bikini. The wedding happened in February 1995, and their relationship became a tabloid sensation. Their leaked honeymoon tape became one of the most infamous celebrity recordings in history, turning their private moment into a cultural phenomenon that helped launch an entire industry. The publicity was unintentional but massive, keeping both Lee and Anderson in headlines for years. Lee's entire career embodied the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle to an almost cartoonish degree. He was arrested multiple times, including for assaulting Anderson in an incident that landed him in jail. But through it all, Lee maintained his status as rock's ultimate party animal, someone who lived every excess the lifestyle promised. His approach to fame was never subtle. It was about maximum spectacle at all times, whether that meant flying drum kits, celebrity marriages, or pushing every limit of decency. The 4-day courtship and beach wedding became part of rock lore, an example of the impulsive decisions that defined an entire generation of rock stars who believed normal rules didn't apply to them. Zakk Wylde survived blood clots because he drank so much. Zakk Wylde, the Black Label Society guitarist and longtime Ozzy Osbourne collaborator, has one of the most bizarrely metal survival stories in rock history. In 2009, Wylde was hospitalized after doctors discovered 3 massive blood clots in his leg. Medical examination revealed he had suffered from blood clotting issues for years, and the 3 largest clots had traveled through his heart and into his lungs. By all medical logic, Wylde should have died. Blood clots of that size moving through vital organs are typically fatal. But Wylde survived, and doctors had an explanation that sounded like something from a heavy metal fantasy. According to reports, his massive alcohol intake had kept his blood so thin that the clots were able to pass through his system without causing the damage they normally would have. Essentially, years of heavy drinking accidentally saved his life by preventing the clots from blocking his blood vessels. It's the kind of story that sounds too absurd to be true, but it fits perfectly with rock and roll's strange relationship with excess. While countless musicians have died from substance abuse, Wylde represents the bizarre flip side where the lifestyle itself becomes a form of accidental medicine. The story became legendary among metal fans as the most metal way to survive a medical emergency. Wylde has continued performing and recording for years since the incident, and the story remains a favorite whenever discussions turn to rock and roll survival tales.